Hey all, Grolo here. Welcome to this week's Back in Focus, number 12. Yes, I skipped last week's because, well, nothing spoke to me last week. But with 4.11 around the corner and a ton of content circulating on it over the past 2 weeks, it feels like a good time to check in on Cloud Imperium. The state of Star Citizen, what they've delivered already and what they will deliver soon, and how it's all tracking against the messaging we heard at the end of last year. I'm talking about the pivot to playability and stability. My contention is this: we're now starting to see the results of the pivot. Let's get into why I say that, because I know some people were asking what happened to stability back during the small patches we saw in January and February. But keep this in mind. We got this announcement at the end of 2024. Then C.I.G went on holiday. We know January is a planning month for the company, and we typically see less output during January. So really what we've had is February, March, and most of April. Now, also keep in mind, it takes time to get code from the developer repositories into production. And by production, I mean live. There's a lot of coordination between teams during delivery for a customer-facing product like this. So the code that we have in a live build will almost certainly lag behind what the developers have checked in by quite a bit. At this point in April, we're probably seeing code that was delivered in late March. That would be what I would expect. Also keep in mind, it takes a lot to turn a ship the size of C.I.G. Companies of this size are not typically very nimble. The fact that we're already starting to see some results, which we'll talk about in a moment, is honestly a bit surprising to me. I didn't expect to see much of anything consequential until late summer or fall. So this is surprising in a positive way. Let's talk about that and summarize just what exactly it is that we're seeing. First, let's talk about the bug fix rate. To get a more stable, more playable game, we're going to need a lot of bugs fixed, issues resolved, missteps corrected, and so on. Now, C.I.G has been publishing bug fix data for a long time. Anyone who works as a dev knows all too well, I'm sure, the difference between a bug ticket and a feature ticket. These days, most dev shops work off boards of some kind, where the board is populated with some cards or some tickets or whatever you want to call them, each one representing a chunk of work, right? To be done. Now that work could be anything. It could be moving to a new server, upgrading a library that your code depends on, implementing a new feature, fixing a bug, and so on. A dev picks up one of these cards, and they begin marching that card across the field that is the board from to do to done. And then they move on to the next one, right? You move that card the whole way to done, you go back to the to-do line, and you start your next card. Now, as an aside, I feel compelled to share a little history here. Because at the start of my career in software development, we did not work this way. Work wasn't broken into cards. It just wasn't tracked at such a granular level, which to this day, I often feel is simply too much overhead in most cases, but I digress. Early on, what we did have was bug tracking. While we didn't track every feature that was ever going to be built in like a never-ending, infinitely growing backlog, you know what I'm talking about if you're in this field, what we did do was we tracked bugs. Anyone remember Bugzilla? Bugzilla landed in 1998. It's still fairly in widespread use to this day. But Bugzilla was a bug tracking system. It dominated early software development, like the early software development landscape. It was developed by Mozilla, who loved to end the names of their products with Zilla. And they had their hands in a lot of stuff, especially back then. They created the Mozilla web browser and later rebranded it to Firefox. They made FileZilla and Thunderbird, one of the few things that didn't end in Zilla. And they gave the internet MDN, which I guess stands for the Mozilla Developer Network. It's an amazing developer site. I'm sure you've used it if you're a developer. And of course, Bugzilla. It wasn't like Jira or many of the board-like systems that we have today. It was just a list of issues found in a program or software. Each of those issues had properties and statuses that could be kind of filtered and searched. It was easy to report an issue with this tool, comparatively to where we had come from, and more importantly, track them and search them, to check to see if an issue had already been reported. Prior to Bugzilla, a lot of this kind of thing was just done on mailing lists and news groups. Remember those? News groups were kind of like a standardized forum. The progression from like standardized tooling, by the way, for like structured content like this to all of the disparate vendor lock systems that we have today is definitely a clear example of entropy at work. I could do probably a whole series on that topic, but I'm drifting off topic here. The point was, is we moved from IRC, a mailing list, and news groups to Bugzilla for a lot of projects. It always seemed to me, by the way, that GitHub issues were inspired by Bugzilla, for what it's worth. Later on, GitHub bolted on boards and stuff on top of them, but in the beginning it was just a list of issues associated with your code repository, which is kind of how people were using Bugzilla, except Bugzilla was decoupled from the code repository where, GitHub coupled them. Anyway, that ends my history rant and brings us back to C.I.G. and bugs. Now, I went back and I looked at all of the live releases, starting with 3.17, which is when I joined the project, up until now, and I tallied up all the bug fixes from each between 3.17 and 4.0 and beyond. So between 3.17 and 4.0, bug fixing was done at a fairly constant rate, as you can see in the graph. Since 4.0 and the announcement of the pivot, that rate has doubled or more. So far, from an average of like 30 or 40 over those few years, peaking just north of 50 on some of the releases, to 100 fixes in 4.01, another 100 fixes in 4.02, and 130 in 4.1.0. So, in the first few months of 2025, we're seeing a clear shift and an increased cadence of bug fixing. If I were to close my eyes and try to be a psychic peering inside the company, just based on my own experience, I'd imagine this is manifesting internally as Jira tickets or whatever system they're using that have the bug type generally being treated with a higher priority, likely in the form of allocated time, which may be governed by, engineers assigned to different swim lanes or something else. There's a whole lot of ways of managing this stuff, but in the end, if say 20% of engineering time in general was allocated to bug fixing previously, whenever we were seeing, 50-ish, give or take, issues fixed on live releases, perhaps now we're seeing the result of like 40 or 50% of engineering time as we see these releases fixing 100 plus. It's hard to place exact numbers on this stuff whenever you're lacking insider knowledge, but at a high level, this is what I would imagine if I close my eyes. So, my question for you is, are you feeling the impact yet? The doubling or tripling of the bug fix rate over these first few months in 2025. Has it begun to impact your gameplay? I'm curious, because this is undoubtedly what they want to see. Bug fixing is one of those things, though, that tends to act like a snowball. Low impact at first, but then it begins to grow exponentially in its impact as fixes are piled on. Because often bugs have like these strange interactions, and it takes multiple fixes to fully realize the impact, just as an example. For me, I can say I've already noticed some impact, but it's been fairly minor so far, which is not surprising. I mean, there's a lot of broken stuff, right? It's going to take some time, but if they are able to sustain a rate of fixing like they've demonstrated these first few months, I'd wager that by, I don't know, Q3, Q4, the game's going to start to feel different. And by the middle of 2026, it'll feel very different. As for some evidence we can reach out and touch, I would say let's just talk post 4.0. First, crash recovery. Now, this wasn't really a fix. Crash recovery was more of a feature that mitigated other bugs and crashes, right? But it's been working well, and it's been doing that job, I would say, admirably. But how often are you experiencing crash recovery? Now think back to how often you experienced 30Ks pre 4.0, and then compare that to how often you're experiencing crash recovery now. If your experience matches mine, then that tells me that DGS stability or game server stability has increased substantially. Because I'm experiencing crash recovery far less often than I experienced 30Ks pre 4.0. Another thing to back this up is pay attention to the server FPS on whichever DGS you happen to be on. Across the board, in my experience, it's been substantially higher on average than at any point in 3.17 or 3.19 or 3.20. Let's just forget about 3.18, okay? Now, some of this we can thank static server meshing for, but some of it falls squarely on a more stable and performant DGS, a more performant and stable entity graph, and so on, which we know they iterated on quite a lot. Now, that's my current focus, because the things that really piss us off, a lot of them are going to be dependent upon those things to improve before we can kiss them goodbye, right? Things like jank and stupid physics. Now, some of that is the result of a whole nother class of bugs, for sure. But some of it's going to be rooted in the reliability and performance of the systems that underlie server authority. We can't blame server authority on things like mining bags clipping into the ground. Please fix this. Or supposedly mining bags being eaten by the refining process in 4.11. I mean, come on. But we may be able to at least partially attribute things along the lines of falling through planets to authoritative blunders, as an example. And boy, has C.I.G had its eyes on mining when it comes to this. When a line of mine landed, mining nodes were not spawning in correctly, which had actually been an issue for quite some time, but it seemed to be exasperated by the patch that featured the profession and game loop front and center. Now, this already seems to be solved in live, for me at least, by one of the hot fixes, I presume. Snapping of bags onto cargo grids, mining bags in particular, and freight elevators, that seems to have been resolved. And there's new features that resolve long-standing disconnects within the loop, within the mining loop. We can refine from bags in local inventory in 4.11. I mean, that's huge. And we can send the results of refining back to local inventory. I mean, that is a huge step in connecting the mining profession to the cargo game loop and profession. In much the same way that salvage has always been, by the way. And as a result, I know my org, we're pretty pumped to get out there and put these changes through its paces. Info below, by the way, if you're interested in joining up for those operations. Now, with every feature comes more work to be done. There's room for improvement on this stuff, as I understand it. I haven't been in the PTU. I haven't played with this myself yet. I've just been doing a lot of reading and viewing of my own, and it sounds like, you know, you can't see what's in the refining boxes that are output to your local inventory easily. Mining bags are eaten by the refining process, as we already mentioned. There's pretty, and those mining bags are pretty expensive, so that's an obvious issue. But a pretty minor one for us, because we don't play for space bucks. It all goes away anyway. I mean, we're playing for the experience, so we're going to be in there doing it like we want to do it, using the cargo, all that. And there's a glaring lack of ability to control, like, what you're refining, like, at a fine-grained level from local inventory, as I understand it. So all things that we'll be looking for more improvement on as things go along, but what we've got in 4.11 is such a huge step forward, and definitely in line with our advertised focus. Another huge thing, Spectrum integration into the game. This is enormous. You know, if you saw the recent videos I've done on Discord's upcoming IPO and the one I did on game comms, and, you know, the trade-offs we've made as we moved from one communication system to another, you know, I'm paying very close attention to what C.I.G is doing with in-game communications. I think what they're doing with Spectrum is a brilliant move, by the way. It competes with Discord's feature set head on, but it gives C.I.G control over the experience and, more importantly, the architecture, which is going to allow them to make decisions and deliver us the features we need to communicate effectively in a game of this scale and complexity. This is something, as you know, I feel that Discord is just in no way up to the challenge for, leaving us today only with options like TeamSpeak, Mumble, those types of things. So, as this, you know, this is going to be the first phase of Spectrum integration. Right now, they have it so that a party channel will be spawned in Spectrum that will connect to the in-game party chat, allowing you to participate via Spectrum or via the in-game party chat system. Now, this is just a first step towards offering us what we need. It'll just be text for now, but as soon as they add voice support to that spawned Spectrum channel, we're on our way. Right? Now you'll be able to have players voice calming within the game, outside the game, etc. Expect a lot more of this as they bring org chat into the game. We've already got org text channels by default on Spectrum. We have no org chat in the game yet, obviously. But I would imagine as they, you know, as at the last CitizenCon, they talked a lot about these these features coming in. I would definitely expect them before the end of 2026. And when that stuff comes in, I would expect them to continue this Spectrum integration so that you can be participating in org chat in-game, out-of-game via the Spectrum client, and so on and so forth, which, I mean, this is some of the stuff that, like, PAX Day, for example, was already working on with the Discord SDK. So C.I.G feels a little bit ahead of the curve here, and like they've been kind of thinking well ahead. So I'm very excited about this, about these moves in general. We'll continue to be paying very close attention to this and talking about this as it evolves. Now, another topic of interest in 4.11 is a few FPS changes. One, having to decide between the Paramed device and a pistol. It may seem minor, but it's encouraging to me that they're starting to implement changes that encourage decision-making around loadouts and roles. I don't expect this change to accomplish much. I mean, in the current state, like, who the hell would choose a pistol over a Paramed device? I mean, let me know if I'm off my rocker, and you would, but I'm thinking probably almost nobody. And that's okay. This is obviously just the tip of the iceberg and a sign of things to come as different armor sizes and weights begin to morph and gravitate towards different roles and goals, right? So we'll see. We'll see where it all heads, but I'm pro that change. Also, in some of the more recent communications, they've talked about more mission locality. In particular, when doing missions around planetary locations, the ability to chain into other missions in the local area. This is awesome and exactly on the right track from where I stand. A lot of people I know have this dream of being able to, like, live and work on one planet for a long period of time. This change and this line of effort ties directly into one of the most critical and foundational pillars that will result in Star Citizen being the biggest thing in gaming for many decades. And that is that it'll be a game for everyone. In order to be that, the scope must be massive. It must be... I mean, on top of that, the geography must be massive, and the functionality within microcosms within that geography, right? That functionality has to be very rich. Most of the people watching this video will be thinking of Star Citizen as a space game. But to be a game for everyone, it can't just be that. It needs to be a planet-side FPS game, too. It needs to be a farming game. It needs to offer building and crafting and decorating, all in support of, like, not just the milsim crowd and the organization-centric crowds, but for the roleplay crowds, for the casual, like, solo player, right? And yes, it needs to offer hunting and fishing. And as CR himself said in the 2022 CitizenCon, someday it will. Now, you may call all of this scope creep. I call all of this exactly what Star Citizen needs to realize the potential it has. And it's why I'm here. So yes, I'm very excited to be able to potentially do a lot of missions in a small geographic region on a planet. I'm looking forward to seeing how this evolves. There's a lot more, of course, in 4.11 on the mission front. Asteroid bases in Stanton, new patrol and ambush missions, a new physical in-game currency for our old pal Wicklow. I'm not sure I have a lot to add on all of that, but I'd love to hear from you below if you do. Like, does any of that stand out as a feature that has you pumped for this patch? For me, it all sounds nice, but it pales in comparison to the changes on locality and the evolution of the game's communication backbone and the improvements to mining, bringing it in line with salvaging. Like, all of that just seems huge in comparison. But, you know, I'm going to enjoy all this content nonetheless. There's nothing here that sounds bad or off base, that's for sure. Another thing I'm very much looking forward to, though, is some of the new ships and changes to existing ships. You all know I'm a MISC guy. What you may not know is I'm also an Argo fan. I've had a raft for a while, so it's good to see it getting some love. I'm looking forward to, you know, how well they nailed the tractor beam changes and the placement on that thing. And of course, the increased capacity is a welcome change. Of course, I love the old design. It's why I had it. But I've always wondered if that design was from like a bygone era that predated me, where like the desire for more physicalized interactions around lifting and moving things, you know, where those kind of lofty goals persisted. I recall discussions shortly after I joined the project, I think, where they were talking about, you know, the possibility of cranes in certain situations over tractor beams, but it seems to me that tractor beams have basically replaced all of that now, which, you know, I understand why from a technical point of view, but it sure would have been cool. I remember whenever the claw on the reclaimer was finally implemented, that was kind of when I realized, like, because I fully expected them to, or was hoping, I guess, that they had some kind of magic up their sleeve where they were going to actually implement a claw extending from the ship and just crushing something, you know. But, you know, reality eventually sets in and the beam makes sense, as underwhelming as it was for some people. Anyway, speaking of Argo, though, sounds like some fixes have mostly resolved the problems with the SRV. It can haul things through quantum again. I know whenever it first came out that worked, but then at some point it broke. I don't even really recall when, but it sounds like it's mostly working again, except for possibly some meshing issues that continue to plague it. Sounds like when the SRV is hauling things, it sounds like the boundaries between DGSs can cause problems and cause the SRV to drop its passenger. But hopefully we'll see some of that resolved soon too. Now back to my favorite, MISC. I'm pumped for the TAC, baby. It's going to be awesome to have a MISC ship with a medical bed and room for a ground vehicle and a scout ship. Should make for a nice mining platform. It does make me wish for more modularity, though. I'd love to have the cargo area from the Max version of the Star Lancer instead of the drop seats in the TAC, but you know, obviously there's a lot of complexity behind that dream, I know. Maybe down the road. Of course, there's a lot more ship stuff being talked about, and I'm sure we'll see plenty of great stuff for Fleet Week. The Anvil Paladin, the Idris interior is complete, it sounds like. There's some other rumors flying around, like an Anvil cargo or transport ship, which sounds interesting. We'll see. Are you looking forward to any of the new ships or ship changes? Tell me about it. Again, on the topic of bug fixing, you feeling the effects yet? What about the mission locality stuff and the spectrum integration, the mining improvements? Does any of that stand out to you? Like, any of that stuff you're excited about? Or the other stuff, you know, the new mission types, new locations in Stanton. I'd love to hear any and all opinions on these things. And of course, the biggest issue raised by this video, how do you rate C.I.G's performance in these first few months of 2025? Do you agree with me? Honestly, I rate them as exceeding expectations based on my own experience in software development and the understanding of how these things go. But I would love to hear your perspective. I'm only one. So hit me up. I'll see you in the comments. I would love to also see you on the Discord linked below. Until next time, take care. Grolo out.